you all for being here. I actually probably don't need the microphone. My students know I'm loud enough without it. But in terms of thank yous, I'd like to thank a few other people as well, just real quickly. I'd like to thank the many students who are in this audience who I've had the honor of taking the Holocaust journey with. If you're here, just kind of raise your hand if you've taken the journey. Thank you. Thank you all. It's wonderful to see you here. A lot of people have graduated who've taken this journey. And I also like to thank the people who led the course with me. Dean Ken Gaither is sitting over here. We have Professor Max Nagin, who is in the building someplace. Max, there he is, he's over here. And especially I'd like to thank Dr. Kathy Lyday, who originated this course, and she invited me to come along with her. Dr. Lyday is retired as well. She's over there. There's an image of a Holocaust survivor as someone with a number on his or her forearm, a reminder of their time at Auschwitz. I saw a lot of those tattoos as a teenager when I was working in the Catskills and at the temple my family attended. But as we've heard from our speakers over the years, there were many ways that people survived the Holocaust. We've had a speaker who survived by hiding in the woods and in a pigsty. We've had a speaker who survived by being part of the kinder transport. And tonight, as Noah said, our speaker has her own unique story. So thank you for being here, Renee. You were a little girl when the Nazis moved through Europe. Where does your story start?
Oh, well, I don't know if this is working. Is it?
Here, use mine.
I couldn't find.
I got you.
Oh, I know.
I got you. You're on.
Okay. Where does my story start other than the fact that I was born in the Netherlands in 1937? My parents had fled Germany right after Hitler was elected in 1933 and had gone to the Netherlands. So that's where my story begins.
So they went to safety. How did that work out?
They thought. But who would have known? I mean, the Holocaust is so unique. Nobody could have believed that anything close to that could ever happen, and that the Netherlands was a welcoming, historically it was a welcoming country.
Until,
and it's not looking that great today.
let's go back 80 years. And
87.
Well, yes. Let's go back to when you were 4. When you were 4, the Nazis were coming through Holland. What did your family do?
They made a huge decision to increase my level of survival, my chance to survive by saying goodbye to me. I think that's a very dramatic show of love and courage, and the reason I'm here. They went into hiding. Instead of separately, they chose to go together, and they were betrayed. But I'm one of the very few children surviving the Holocaust. There were 5 to 7% of all Jewish children in all of Europe who survived, and I'm one of those lucky ones.
How did it happen? What did they do?
Well, I think the difference is my survival is simply that there were great, everything is an understatement when you talk about Shoah, which is the Hebrew word for Holocaust. So there was great courage involved on many, many levels, beginning with this act of love my parents performed by saying goodbye to me forever. Then there was the Dutch underground, which was what we called the resistance. It was very large in the Netherlands, but so were the collaborators. It was a unique sort of place in that sense. A lot of people were very happy to work with the Germans, considered themselves very similar, and had Germanic sympathies. But then there were the resistance people at all levels, everyone doing a tiny job, so, and under false names, so no one knew what was going on in the larger picture. And so a home was found for me, and
Well, let's go to that time, right? So you're 4 years old. Is this the last time you saw your parents?
they put me on a stranger's bicycle, and we never saw each other again. So then I found myself in a new town. And
Wait, let's get back to that. They put you on a stranger's bicycle. Somebody they didn't know.
True, yeah.
What do you think was going through their heads? What was happening at that
I,
point?
at 4 years old, I didn't know what was going on. And you know, in those days, we were to be seen and not heard. And in those days, knowledge was so dangerous that you wouldn't tell a 4-year-old something because we got excited about things that we shouldn't have been talking about. And I, as a 4-year-old, I don't think you can compare today's 4-year-olds and their level of knowledge from the media, and they can work computers. Well, I knew nothing.
So it's your mom and dad, and how many other siblings?
No one else. I was the only child because I don't think you would have wished to have more children in such times.
So they put you on a bicycle with a stranger.
No explanation.
No explanation. What happens next?
I didn't remember how far, because to a 4-year-old, you don't really have a sense of time and place, and you don't ask questions, you obey. I know that's very difficult for young people to imagine, but I didn't ask questions. I found myself in a I was tiny, I was small-boned and petite. The house seemed large, and there wasn't anybody in it that I could remember, and no explanations forthcoming. And then large people began to come back at the end of the workday. And these large people, well, they had bigger bone structures. They had blonde hair. I had black eyes. Once a woman on the street told me to go home and wash my eyes because they were too black. People always felt that they could intervene in those days and mess with your private eye colors. And whether I rode on a little, something you pedal with your right foot, another woman, scooter. Later in my youth, she told me never do that again because your right leg will be shorter than the other leg. So, I didn't ask questions, and I didn't know what all these large people were doing, and I had never seen so many people because my new family had 8 children and 2 parents. And being an only child, that seemed like a lot of people coming into one home. No explanations came, and I remember being very homesick.
So you go from being an only child in a Jewish family to being one of now 9 in a Catholic family.
A devout Catholic family.
How devout?
Holy water on the posts of our bedroom doors. So we dipped our hands, crossed ourselves. I learned the rosary, I got a new name, and I became a devout Catholic. And with all the fears, because God was judging me all the time, every minute of my thinking and acting life. But I grew to love everybody in this house. You cannot imagine. They were my brothers and my parents, and I adapted, I guess, quickly.
So you went from saying a brucha over bread to saying the rosary and the Lord's Prayer and all that kind of thing. That must have.
I don't remember the Lord's Prayer, but the Catholic Church in the Netherlands was all Latin. So we had no idea of what we were saying or saying, praying, or anything else. And we had never said a brucha at home over anything. So I didn't know that I was Jewish. It wasn't something you talked about with 4-year-olds in 1939. Well, being born in 37, you know, once a child has a vocabulary and is speaking in an uncensored manner, you don't tell children things that could be trouble.
Right. Tell us about your Catholic family.
I have to smile. The courage, that was the third step of the courage of how I am alive, that this family was found. Typical of Dutch people and Dutch culture, they were very matter of fact. When I wanted them honored at Yad Vashem, do I need to explain that, or should we get to that later? I'll just continue. They didn't want any part of this honor. They didn't do it for that. Some people they preached humility. Let's say the father was the strong one. I called them Mama and Papa, and Mama was dying of brain cancer this entire time. So she didn't have a lot of input. She only observed how her daughters were running the house. But Papa was the presence and the power that made everything run. And he was a man very stern, no nonsense. His children were really afraid of him. He spoon-fed me when I came to this family. He had never even touched his children in any gesture of affection. And he was so wonderful to me. So I don't know if I...
Well, why would somebody do that? The risk was that he would be killed and
all his family would be killed. It was the right thing to do. That is their thinking. It's that simple. But if you do such a good deed and you try to save someone's life, what amazes me is that they had no idea if I'd be there a week or, a few weeks or a few months or a few years. You go into this without any knowledge. And I was there until way after the war, because even though my grandmother survived, she was on the run. She wasn't on her feet. She had no money. She had no place for me to live with her. So that took some months, and I stayed always with the Funda Brinks. And
you remember your name that they gave you?
Oh, it was my second name. The day I got there, I had a new name. And it had to be kind of a very Dutch, very kind of farm name. So I was Rita van den Brink. And that was one of my many names.
What was it like growing up? What the other kids, what was their reaction to you? The other
I don't really know, because I'm not sure how much awareness I had. And if I was aware, it's not a memory. But I found them loving and kind, and the house was really not that big, because I have been there since. In the late 1900s, I once paced the bedroom when I revisited, the bedroom where it was the girls' room. There were 3 bedrooms, 11 people, so we had a girls' room and a boys' room and the parents' room. And I paced it, and it was about 8 by 10. So then I realized that there must have been one bed, which was a godsend because it was cold. And I think it helped us keep each other warm. because we were not only hungry, we were very cold.
Did you keep up with those siblings after the war?
Yes, I found them in the same house, the same address, but I was married at the time, and I was very young, and I had to write the letter. But if you're really young, you think everyone else is ancient and that they've died for sure. So I didn't know how to address the letter. You know? How do you not make a terrible faux pas in the way you write this letter? Was the father still alive? Well, I wrote it in English because I had lost my mother tongue by then, and they wrote back immediately. And instead of Papa, it was signed Your War Daddy. And it was translated and written in English by my youngest sister. I was an only child, but I had 5 brothers and 3 sisters. And they have all died, but they're my brothers and sisters.
Do you see them after that time? Had you kept up afterward?
That's when it started. They came to visit me for 2-3 weeks at a time. They came, one of them at least, either from Australia or from the Netherlands. They came to hold up the chuppah for my daughter's wedding, at my daughter's wedding. They came for my sons and daughters' bar bat mitzvahs. And they would stay. Maybe just one at a time, but many of them came. And we grew closer, and we just loved each other. And they have all died since then, and I have relationships now with their children.
Wonderful. What about your birth family? What happened to them? Your mom, dad, cousins,
My
aunts?
mother and father, as I said, were betrayed. You know, there was a bounty on a Jewish head. Oh, thank you. Oh, thanks. There were bounties on Jewish heads, so people hunted Jews, turned them in, betrayed them. And my mother and father were hiding on a houseboat. And when I found out about that, I thought, what happens to this boat in the winter? The winters in the Netherlands have wind from the North Sea and ice. They're very inhospitable winters. It's a damp, windy, icy cold. What happens to the boat, and how did they suffer? Anyway, they were turned in, and then they found their way to the usual route that Jews followed in the Netherlands, first to the Hollandse Schouwburg, where they were all put in one small space in Amsterdam, and then they were released if they were lucky. I don't really know the details on the Schouwburg. It was called the Jewish Theater, and sooner or later, I don't really have the facts, they went to a transit camp in the northeast of the Netherlands called Westerbork. And from there, they waited every Tuesday, I think it was every Tuesday, the train would go to Auschwitz. But you never knew which Tuesday was your day to go. So that's where they ended up, and they were murdered. And in the end of my family, a couple of cousins had come to America in the late 30s. And the ones who were in Europe, my maternal grandmother's entire family, her sisters and brother, everyone in my family was murdered either at Auschwitz or Sobibor, which is where the train went from Westerbork. And my grandmother one of her 3 children, and I survived. So I felt, first of all, that I was one of the lucky ones and I wasn't a survivor because I was never in a concentration camp. But in the years I was told that I was indeed a survivor, and I guess I am.
You are. How did your grandmother survive?
You know, my grandmother and my aunt were kind of on the run, and a lot of this comes down to sheer luck at times, or a very intuitive feeling in your gut that something isn't altogether right. Jews in the Netherlands were severely limited at some point. They were not allowed to have eggs. Though, of course, they couldn't go shopping, they couldn't go to school, they lost their jobs, but then they still had to eat. And I mean, we're all animals, we need food, but they were not allowed to have eggs, and they were not allowed to cook. So they had to go to some houses that were supposedly safe houses. So my grandmother and my aunt were together, and one night they went to one of these safe houses, and my aunt said, "It doesn't feel right, we're not going in." And as they were standing at the far side of the street and had made this decision, the house was raided. So, of course, all those Jews were taken away. Another time, it was reversed. My grandmother said, "Something is wrong here." So, with a sixth sense, luck, timing, they separated, but they managed to survive, each one. And my aunt and her brother became very active in the resistance because they thought, I mean, we're all assured of death, so let's make our lives at least count before. And my aunt survived.
You talked about food. What was food like when you were living with your family?
When I went to the Dutch family, my mother had gone there before, which was something that other people didn't do. She appeared one day, and one of my brothers in his old age told me this story. I never knew it, but she went to look over the place where I was going to be taken, and that she knew that was already amazing. I don't know how this worked. And she must have said that I didn't eat this, that, or the other, and that I don't know, whatever she could tell about me. Well, none of that ever was followed because we ate what was served. And it was simple, and I grew to be ravenous. I was always hungry, so I adapted very well.
What kind of clever things did your family that took you in, what kind of clever things did they do to make sure that you were safe and that they were safe?
They had to do an awful lot, and it's shocking. The Germans knew where the Jews were through one way or another. And I mean, they didn't know I was hiding in that Catholic house, but they came often. And so my family had to go to any extremes to keep me safe, to keep themselves safe. The Germans would count people in the house sometimes. The count had to come out right. So once or more, they sent their own daughter out of the house into the street. And she could, if she was caught in the street walking around, and she was questioned, she simply said, "I'm visiting my aunt," or something. But they made one of their own children leave the house so that the head count came out. That was risky. Other times they had to outsmart the Germans by hiding me. They would throw me, if they had enough warning. And we didn't live with telephones or, communication. We weren't allowed to have radios of any kind. Life was different. So you sometimes got word from your neighbors that they were coming house to house and had little advance notice. So then they would throw me in bed and throw a blanket over my head, partially covering my face, my hair, because I was dark and they were all lighter colored, of different build. And they would say I had TB. And the Germans had a fear of communicable diseases that you couldn't imagine. And they always ran out of the house, and it was a big joke. And we didn't always have that kind of warning. So if we didn't hear from the neighbors and they just banged down the door and they didn't wait to have someone open it and say, welcome, they would just storm in, and then they threw me in a corner of the living room or dining area. For some reason, they had a dunce cap in the house, and they would put it on me and point to me and say, oh, well, she's cuckoo. So they just ignored me. But at the same time, you have to wonder, if someone is not right in the head, the Germans would put them to death. So I don't know how that worked. Maybe they weren't super educated soldiers, but I lived, they lived. It was all amazing.
When did you discover you were Jewish, and how did you react to that?
I don't know that. I think well after the war, my grandmother sent me for a Hebrew lesson with a Hebrew teacher. And I was 8 and a half or so. Oh, yes, I was at least 8 and a half, beyond. And I didn't know what this woman was trying to tell me. But there were Hebrew letters, and I came back to my grandmother. I adored her. And I said, I'm never going back to that old prune again. And so my grandmother didn't have... It's still on. She said, okay. I mean, she was incredibly modern. She was very modern in her youth. She went to work. She chose to go to work. And so in those days, people had servants. Unless you were very poor, I think they all had servants. Didn't make them so fancy, but she had people to take care of the children, and she chose to work.
I think a lot of us have had that reaction to our Hebrew teachers, but I'm curious, though, it sounds like your upbringing was fairly stern and certainly difficult with the amount of hiding you had to do. At what point did you really learn to laugh again?
Wow. Not when I first came to America. I was very sad, and I was not welcome anywhere. And I really, now in retrospect, I'm seeing that the fact that I survived was an enormous inconvenience to the adults who were vaguely related to me, because someone had to take care of me, and it didn't work out no matter where I went. So I was a huge inconvenience, and for me it was all very sad I felt emotionally abused. I was told every day how stupid I was. And that's bad enough when an adult tells you that, but when they're both physicians, then you think, oh, well, they know everything, so what do I know? By the time I went to college, I thought they made such a mistake that they're going to find out that I'm an imposter, And will I last a week, or are they going to discover how stupid I am and throw me out? So I lived my life that way. And it took long before I could laugh. But now people say I'm funny. I don't. It's very funny, peculiar.
We're going to take some questions from the audience in a moment here. So Betsy and I think Boaz have microphones. But while we get that organized, I have one other question for you, Renee. Yeah. And that is, if you could see your parents and some of your other family members again, what would you tell them? What would you say?
Oh my God. I never thought about that because it's so out of the realm of reality. I wouldn't know. But if I could choose to meet someone, it would be my parents. And I think the words might just flow, but no one ever even, it's not anything that ever entered my mind. You can't wish for what isn't. I'm a realist, so.
Okay, some questions from the audience.
Raise your hands high so we could see. Oh,
There we go.
Hunter.
I see.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. You mentioned coming to America, and obviously you're here. Could you tell us a bit more about how that happened and how you grew up and lived the rest of your life?
In order to come to America, you had to have a sponsor. And by the time I came, we were not welcome in America during the war. There was not a chance for us to flee. And people mistakenly think that the Jews went to slaughter like sheep. I just want to insert this thought. We had nowhere to go. We had no country that would take us. And we also formed a great resistance. So did non-Jews, and Jews were in the resistance. We fought at every point. By the time I was able to come to America with permission, a great uncle who had come also in the 30s, he brought a whole ship container with medical instruments. He was also practicing. He sponsored me. You had to have a sponsor, and my grandmother brought me. And my grandmother couldn't stay. She didn't have papers, permission, or money. She had to go back to Holland. So here I was on my own. And that was more difficult. The war years were my best years in childhood. And I am not the only child to say that. You may think it's crazy, but life can get really crazy afterwards, and that's one thing we should all be aware of. The world is now filled with traumatized people who have survived wars in all the continents. And I know some of the people in Africa have said they forgave each other, but that will always be a question. So I went on, I went to the two relative homes, and I ran from one to the other when things got too bad. And then I saved all my 50 cent an hour babysitting money, every penny. And I had, I secured a room with kitchen and bath privileges, and I got a job, a full-time job. So I lived in Queens, I worked in Manhattan, and then I went to night school in Brooklyn, and I paid my $10 a week. and I didn't have to depend on any of these people. And then I got married very young, which everybody expected, and I guarded against marrying poorly, by just taking the first opportunity to get out of my life. And that was my great, great good fortune, to make a good marriage.
schlepping around between Manhattan and Queens and Brooklyn. That's a lot of schlepping.
I
That's
was
a lot
tired.
there.
I think it was tiring, but I didn't have a social life at that point. I've met a friend from my earlier years in the subway. So at least there was one person.
Hi, my name is Brandon Popper. I just want to say thank you for coming out and speaking to us. As we get to this point where we're starting to get separated from Holocaust survivors who experienced it, what's your message for our generation so we can continue your legacy and continue your stories?
I really thank you very much, because growing up in the Funderbrink house, I was taught to have humility and never to attract attention to self. So it's very difficult for me to speak about my life as a survivor, because that's not the message. The message is, what have we learned? And I think well, for one thing, if you were born in America, you have always had freedom. If you have never been without freedom, you don't know that you're not appreciating it in a sense that you're taking it for granted. It would never occur to us in the United States to lose freedom, to lose our liberties, and to have a fascist state. But I don't want to be political, but there are patterns of behavior. There is repetition in what is happening in this country, and you have bullies from the time you're in grade school. I think many of you have suffered from bullies, if you haven't been a bully, and maybe still suffering in some sense from being bullied. I think Nazis took bullying to such an extreme. And so you've seen it on small levels, even if you've only witnessed it. Do you see patterns of behavior that are repeating themselves from the beginning of fascism in Germany? I always thought we study history so we can do it better the next time, have a bigger, better war. But I really think we can learn positive things from history and intervene.
They say, my history professor friends say that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And that's kind of where we're looking at now. So
rhymes.
We have patterns, and you have dots you can fill in lots of places. We have a question up there, though.
This work? Okay. Hi, I'm Lila. Thanks so much for sharing your story. My question is, what did your schooling look like back in the war years, if it was able to happen? And also if you want to share after as well.
My school years?
Sorry, I know.
No,
I
I'm
thought of this
laughing.
question because my grandpa's a Holocaust survivor as well, and he always said that schooling or your education's the one thing that nobody can take away from you. So I was wondering if anything at all you were able to experience that, and if that resonates with you too.
I think your grandfather was very right. And that's why so many Jews played the violin. They could take it with them more easily. You don't drag a piano under your arm. But I cannot relate directly because I was illiterate. I did not know how to read or write, and I was by then past 8.5. So I was closer to 9 when I first went to school. And you know, to this day, I'm a very slow reader, and I didn't learn to read properly. And when I finally went to school, it was such a fancy, progressive private school. I think I was a pity case I got to go there. I learned how to beat rugs and mop floors with my hands. And it was so progressive that we learned how to identify mushrooms and mop floors. And the royal princesses were my classmates.
Oh, interesting. But you became a teacher. You were, is that what you did? No. Okay.
No.
I thought you were a teacher.
I've never been a teacher.
Would you like to be a teacher? Because we have an opening that we could be very good for you.
I wouldn't know what to do with children. I did have 2 children, and I have a grandson in the audience.
We have another question over here.
Hi, I'm Rada. Thank you again for coming. I was wondering, like, what your transition was between, like you said, you know, you were born Jewish, and then you were, like, you switched, and you were with this family, and you were observing with them, and then you cut to, like, later, and you said your kids are B'nai Mitzvah. I was wondering, like, what your transition was back to Judaism.
I remember reading Wook. Herman Wook. I can never pronounce his name. It was a Wook book. One God, and then I read something by James Michener. I mean, this is not the greatest literature, but they're very informative novels. What was the big one by James Michener about?
Kathy, do you know?
No, I was just thinking about the Winds of War, Herman Wouk's The Winds of War.
Oh, that was a history of the war, but he wrote One God or something similar to that, and that was about Judaism. I had never been in a synagogue, and the family I went to live with in the mountains were Jewish, but they sent me to Methodist Sunday school. So I had no idea. And when I was in college, I went to synagogue, but I didn't know how to behave. I know that you wore a hat and a veil to go to church and that your arms were covered. But and when you stood up and when you sat down and stuff like that, I didn't know what to do in the temple. But, you have to use some kind of pure courage to get beyond all these little bumps in the road. And I felt very Jewish and proud, and I'm ethnically, fiercely Jewish. But it came from within, it didn't come from anywhere else.
Do we have a question? Any questions? Oh, okay, Becky. Well, we'll pass it down to you and then we'll pass it to you. Oh, sorry. Pass.
I can even hear you.
Do you remember the first time you were in a temple? Just to follow up on that.
It was at college. It was the High Holy Days. It was Rosh Hashanah. And that was it. But I don't know what happened in temple. I was so busy watching the other people. Were they sitting or standing? So that I could follow the crowd and not be, At that age, when you're still in your late teens, I was very self-conscious and shy and insecure. So, yeah, I was watching what they were doing.
I want to thank you for being here and sharing your story. So once you became a parent, I assume that you reflected a lot on the decisions that your parents had to make for you at such a young age. I'm wondering if you could talk about the impact your childhood had on the way you raised your children and your family.
It's a very good question, but again, I don't think I was at all typical because I have heard of very overprotective Holocaust parents, survivors who were so overprotective that it was very hard on their children. I was in total denial. I didn't ever tell anybody about myself. I never told either one of my 2 children about myself. They knew nothing. And I didn't appreciate even the fact that I was a mother and what my parents had done. My mind was in such a form of denial that, and then I had kind of a serious illness. My thyroid gland became toxic, So then my behavior was a little stressful for everybody. Someone who had that illness was spent 25 years in a mental institution, and it was just a thyroid condition. And a friend of mine told me that he, because of my history, had diagnosed this poor man and set him free. So it took some years to get my thyroid under control, which didn't make my children's lives very easy. But I was in denial. And in later years, when you reflect more on your life and you think, you reach very difficult points in your thinking, that I begin to wake up. And I can only apologize to my children, but I had never seen any child brought up. So I didn't even know what I was doing, but I have very strong principles. And they were going to appreciate if I let them have one ice cream per week, that they wouldn't take anything for granted and that they would appreciate fully whatever life had to offer them.
Hi. I was wondering, especially now that you mentioned like later in your life when you began to wake up, like have you had the opportunity to grieve the loss of your parents and really the loss of your innocence as a child?
It's tough to be from the Netherlands. We weren't allowed to show emotion. And when I came to America, and they made fun of my Dutch the first night I was with this new family, they said in German, "That's not a language, it's a throat disease." It was all I had to my name. It was hurtful. So, and every time I was 10 years old, and so I was in a difficult situation. And my lower lip or some chin, I don't know what happens when you begin to cry, they would ridicule me. So I don't cry, I'm grieving. It's very hard for, I would say, people from Northern Europe. It's hard. So I don't even know, because crying is a shameful thing. And we all know that crying is as good for you as laughing chemically. The body, it helps. Some of us are not able to. And then maybe there's a fear that if you start, maybe you can never stop.
Two more. We have one in the back, and then we have one in the front, and then.
Hi, my name is Osiris. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for being able to share your life story and giving us insight to both the struggles and triumphs that you went through. I would like to ask, looking at the current socio-political state of the world comparatively to the socio-political state that you grew up in, it's hard to believe that you don't have a place in this world when you wake up, or that you may no longer have a place in this world. What advice would you have to this generation to deal with what we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis?
That's the problem. You're asking me for wisdom. I wake up every day worrying about the immigrants, down to the people who were born in this country, who have citizenship. I worry about the families being broken up. That it happened the last time with our present leader. What advice? What can they do? I don't have the answer for that. I know a lot of people are living in abject fear, and also government workers who no longer have jobs, who don't know where the future of the country lies. The only comfort is that it's not just the United States.
Is that a comfort?
No, it's not a comfort, but the whole world. By the way, the rest of the world was suffering an inflation. It wasn't just one person who made an inflation in America. The whole world suffered, and now much of the current world is suffering a direction towards fascism, strong men. All the Western European countries, well, Italy isn't Western European, but the Netherlands can vote for bad people like they did. Italy, Hungary, I mean, look anywhere, and we're taking a very, very negative path.
Give us something positive on that.
Okay. I'm supposed to always leave everybody with hope, so here it is. I didn't think of this beforehand, but a very wise lecturer came to where I live. We have good lectures and good discussions. He said the pendulum swings faster in our current world. Everything is more accelerated. So we may not have more than one term of this direction of fascism. We may go back to trying to undo the harm, and the whole world may have that pendulum swinging back towards a more hopeful future. And it will be 4 years, the older you get, the faster they go.
We have one last question.
Is that hope or not?
Hi, my name is Alana. I want to say thank you again for sharing your story. It means a lot. My question, going back to when you said that you didn't really tell a whole lot of people about your life, when did you realize that you wanted or needed to tell your story, and how did you come to that?
Oh, it was something so amazing. I had been silent until 1991, and that was a turning point. It was huge. There was a gathering of child survivors of the Holocaust in New York, in Manhattan, and I found myself there. With great trepidation, I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know that there was a category for, I thought I was the only one who had this strange life, and that I never belonged, I never fit in. And suddenly, here I was in the city with 1,600 other hidden children. And do you know, the first aid stations, they had them in this conference, were psychiatric. I find that so remarkable. They didn't have Band-Aids, I didn't go to one of them, but just hearing it. So 1,600 children from all over the world gathered. We had workshops, we had general, what do you call when it's the lectures for, well, big ones, and then I can't remember the word. That's one of my problems now. So I befriended some other child survivors, and I formed kind of a whole new friendship circle. And I learned that I was one of all these people, and we were in no uncertain terms told, as the last living generation to bear witness to Shoah, that it was our duty, our mission to speak, so that it would never be forgotten.
And that is a wonderful way to end our conversation. Thank you so very much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ms.